you approach them in the language that they are so comfortable. In fact, that's how come at Best Point we are able to have close to 160,000 customers in just 3 years. We started business on the 20th of January 2014, and just at the last 20th January 2017, we had close to 150,000 customers. And these are people who are actually doing business with us. If you get the opportunity to interact with these people one-on-one, then they will tell you some of the amazing things we are doing for them too.
It's good to hear you talk about the amazing things you're doing. Yeah. You mobilize a lot of funds.
We do.
And the criticism with a lot of these SMEs is that a lot of these savings and loans companies and microfinance institutions is that your interest rates are extremely high.
Of course, you cannot compare the interest rates we charge to that of the banks. You know, for us, the medium is such that you attract deposits at very high interest rate. People come and they do fixed deposits which form more than 50% of the deposit mix you have as an institution. And so therefore, you are handicapped in a way to be lending to a customer just as a bank would do. But then the unique selling proposition for us is that you're able to approach us, and within some 48 hours, bingo, you have your loan, you have your facility. And so
that's exciting. Everybody who needs money and gets it at such ease is excited. But the big question is how well they are able to pay, how capable they are. What's your ratio of non-performing loans?
For us, at Best Point, NPL is less than 6%. You know, the industry average is just about 5%. So you are doing just about 6%. Yes, we could have done better. I mean, we would wish that we would have less than even 2% of NPLs.
But you're giving short-term loans to SMEs.
Yes.
And you have interest rates as high as 60, 70%. Doesn't make sense.
No, for us at Best Point, no. You can't have an interest of like...
But we're talking about generally.
Generally, yes. Yeah. Yes. You see, if you have a critical look at the industry, it is rather the microfinance institutions, those under our level, I mean the savings and loans companies, that do charge extremely high. But for the savings and loans, let's say the person with the highest rate of lending would be about 6.9% per month. But for us, we do far less than that at Best Point Savings and Loan. That's how come for any branch at all we open. I mean, if you've been fortunate to see any of these branch opening, a lot of people rush to the venue to come do business with us. It is for no reason that when we are launching a branch, for example, the one we just did in Sunyani, where you had this NDK, Microfinance, Jasper Motors and all that, we were able to launch a branch, and in a single day, we opened 500 accounts. I mean, you won't have this anywhere. It is only at Best Point. And it tells you of the kind of value we give to the people we do business with. Other than that, I mean, no matter the noise you make, people will not feel attracted to come to your venue and have a business.
The current government is championing the private sector-led growth.
Yes.
How best do you think SMEs can be factored into this?
Yes, let me tell you this, Pakwesi. You know, for the Class 1 banks, the universal banks, you know, because of the kind of bureaucracy and the long procedure you go through to have a loan approved for you, by the time you have access to the funding, it's almost useless. I mean, and money you have at a time you don't need, you better don't take it. I mean, it's as simple as that. And some of these things we speak from personal experiences, encounters that we have actually had with people. But for us, if you come to us, any savings and loans company at all, if we will deal, we'll let you know straight away that this is a deal we'll go for. If we won't, we'll let you know. It's not about this bureaucracy, credit committees, meeting next week and next month. And by the time you are aware, 6 months is gone, you don't have access to the funding you needed badly. So for us, what we are saying is that money worth giving is worth giving at a time you most need it, and not when in the convenience of the bank. I mean, they think that now they have done enough due diligence and the essence or the agency of you needing the money is gone.
My final question to you, the finance minister has been talking a lot about job creation. He's talking about cutting down on taxes and widening the tax net. Do you think that the medium private sector person will be affected in any way by this policy?
I think it's a good thing if the government is able to do that. And for us at GALSAC, you know, we play advocacy role as well. When the taxes on financial services was being introduced, we actually sat with the regulators, Ghana Revenue Authority, and asked them to see reason in dialoguing with us to waive this 17.5% VAT that they are charging on the services that the banks render. And they saw a lot of wisdom in that. And as a result of that, for the savings and loans companies, those under the umbrella body of GALSAC, all of us are exempted from charging VAT on the services we render. And so it comes as good news, especially where a lot more taxes are going to be cut down. This means that money is being put back into your institution to help you improve on your liquidity. And liquidity is the lifeblood of the business you do. If taxes is taking the money small, bits and pieces out of your capital, it means that eventually by the time you do like 1 year, you'd have lost a huge amount of money. And these are monies you could have actually used to buy credit for, let's say, your ECG, you could have used to pay a staff, you could have used to do something else to bring you some more money. So I think it's a good thing if the government is able to.
I've got to say a big thank you to you, Jacob Aidan is a financial analyst, he's also a member of GALSAC, helping us to explore some issues within the savings and loans industry. You're still watching Business Focus, your week. All right, so you're welcome back to Business Focus, your weekly business and economic analysis program. As I mentioned, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta has been interacting with the media in Accra on the state of the Ghanaian economy. He's been talking about a number of issues, throwing light on the state of the economy, talking about inflation and how to control it, the International Monetary Fund program, and how Ghana intends to implement it. Already we've got 2 years. We've got just about a year or so to be done. Talking about fiscal policies and quite a number of issues, how to create jobs and all that. I've been joined in the studio by Edu Owusu-Sarkodie. He is an economist with the University of Ghana. And then Ben Amwa, also an economist with First Bank Financial Services. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. I beg your pardon. So let's start off by hearing from the finance minister. He's been talking about the economy, talking about government arrears, talking about the debt level, CD stability, IMF program, inflation, taxes in the banking sector. Let's first hear what he had to say on the Ghanaian economy.
The statutory funds or earmarked funds have moved from about 25% of our tax revenues and now approaching about 44.7%. If you add the interest payments we pay and salaries, it gives you very little room to maneuver. So there are certain rigidities that are not good for any government. So even if I have a social policy, if I cap this thing and then I have discretion of then reallocating into these same self-places, at least it will be done within the framework of our economic policy and direction. And I think every government needs that to be able to do that. And I think it's one of the things that fundamentally any government should look at anyway. So that's what I mean. So it gives you space to reallocate back to social or to put into some sort of private sector driven economic space generating activity. We are partly in a discovery state, and we need to be sure after certain validations where we are going to do. But I'm still pretty optimistic about the outlook and what we'll be able to do by the end of the year.
All right, so that was Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta speaking on the economy and some of the immediate challenges that confront every government. I started with you, Edu Owusu-Sarkodie, who's an economist with the University of Ghana and also works with the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Edu, your brief comments on the Finance Minister's
Yeah, I think right now what every economist is talking about is the fiscal space. Government, we have a new government in power, so they need to embark on a number of policies, and in order to achieve all these policies, you need to create space. When we say fiscal space, we need that creating more money. Any avenue that will help you to create more money.
But he alludes to rigidities.
He talks about fiscal rigidity since
statutory payments too.
Yes. What the point we are making is that there are some payments in the expenditure column that are statutory. They are required by law, and there are others that you can always manipulate. So after paying the statutory ones, you'll be left with virtually nothing to control. So it's because we don't have more revenue. Since 2013, we've always been having negative fiscal space. In other words, when we finish paying the statutory, payments, allocations, there's virtually negative left. We have to even go and borrow in order to meet the other obligations. So he is talking about raising the revenue. So it's like this: if you raise the revenue, your expenditure, whichever level your expenditure is, you'll be able to, create more space for yourself. So. Well, of course, there are too many statutory payments. The District Assembly Common Fund, the National Health, the Road Fund, Get Fund. These are the statutory payments. You have to pay them. They are required by law. And he's saying that after paying, you are left with virtually nothing else to control.
So what you're saying is that in spite of raising revenue from taxes, in spite of the grants that you get, when you accumulate all this, in spite of the oil revenue that you also get,
to cater for even the statutory ones, we will be left with negative fiscal space since 2013.
But Ben, these are challenges that the economy has been exposed to over the years. It's nothing new, really.
Well, yes, it is not entirely new. I think it got worse with the debt accumulation we've seen since around 2010, 2011. The issue then became the fact that even if there's something left over, after making the statutory payments, all of it goes into interest payments. And so we have seen a steady increase in the amount of money that we spend on paying or retiring debt. And like Mr. Sarko just said, it gets to a point where we even have to borrow to pay off the debt, or we have to borrow in order to satisfy interest expenses. And that is not good. I mean, there's no way you can keep that going forward. And I think that's one of the main reasons why our debt figures kept rising and rising, because then we're borrowing to pay back more loans, which, I mean, is not a sustainable measure for any economy or for any government to follow. And I think that's a real issue that they will have to deal with. We haven't seen the budget yet. They are saying to come out in March. Hopefully they'll be able to address that issue in the budget. But if they don't, then we can't really expect anything to change going forward.
Let's hear the finance minister also talk on government arrears.
At the very least, we know that the task is a lot more than we anticipated with regards to the areas that we have discovered, because that has immediate ripple effects on what we can or cannot do, or more importantly, how fast we can or cannot do things. So that is what we have to deal with. And by the end of the IMF visit on the 10th or 15th, I think the process of discovery and certainty and validation would have gone a long way, because we would have been doing it anyway. And that would hopefully the President will have a State of the Nation address somewhere in late February, and we should get a lot more certain numbers on that.
All right, so that was Ken Ofori, the finance minister, talking about government arrears, and says it is even worse than they anticipated. Sakode, I'll start with you again on this one. We hear this from a lot of governments that, okay, let's take the finance minister on the debt level, and then we can combine the two, government arrears and the debt level, and then we'll talk about them.
Engagement with the fund. I mean, first of all, we've been very forthright and upfront with the numbers, and so we are all having to deal with those numbers, make sure that there's no double counting, make sure we agree on them. I think we are at a pace where we are sort of settling in on sort of these new numbers that we have found, and so this week going forward will then be if really the program is derailed to a certain degree, how are we going to work together for further fiscal discipline and consolidation to be able to then bring down the deficit and still get us some space to effect economic that we need to inject something for growth, so that the issue of jobs, it's not compromised. So those would be the negotiations, but I think we would bridge that gap. I mean, because we believe in fiscal discipline, and that's fundamentally the core orientation that the fund has. But we also know that the mandate that was given us was for growth and jobs, and that cannot be compromised on our side. We'll have to signal that strongly somehow in the budget, and we intend to do that.
All right, so you just had the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, there. Ben, I'll start off with you on this one. So the Finance Minister sounds quite forthright, but you ask yourself, you hear a lot of these politicians during the campaign period telling you about how terrible the economy is, and the incumbent says, no, things are good, no, it's terrible. So you come into power, you get there to run the affairs of the economy, and you come back to tell us that, oh, things were actually worse than we thought. Are they just not trying to find excuses why they can't work?
It depends on the context with which you are looking at it. Last week in an investor call with Standard Chartered, the finance minister stated that they haven't finished the calculations yet, but it's beginning to look like the fiscal deficit might be double digits. And so everyone is saying, say, 10%. Now, the problem with that is they were expecting the government to have overspent to the tune of about 7%. 10% is far worse than what anybody would have thought them to have done. And it is so because the target for last year was 5.3%. And if you're doing 10%, it means they've spent almost double more than what they were supposed to have spent. And that would be a serious issue, especially if it's, the fact that it was an election year. And so it brings us back to that whole cycle about how whenever it's an election year, Ghanaian politicians, throw all the economic rules out of the window and do what they want. I think that's the main issue now. And investors are a little scared about that because nobody has still seen the figures yet. And yet the finance minister comes out initially to say there's some 7 billion in arrears that they have found on the books, and then suddenly the fiscal deficit for 2016 was around 10%. What it basically means is that they can't really do anything this year. Because if they are going to be able to manage the fiscal deficit down again, they might have to cut spending altogether. And so it's likely that we are going, if that is true, in any case, if the figures come out and it's really 10%.
Now, assuming without admitting that what you're saying is anything to go by, how are the Ghanaian people going to understand this?
That would be a very serious issue. I reckon it would be almost impossible for Ghanaians to come to terms with this. I mean, they campaigned on the premise that the previous government were bad managers of the economy. The impression you have created then is that if you come to power, everything is going to be fine. If it isn't fine in a year, I think they're going to have very serious issues with the Ghanaian public. And see,
I'm beginning to wonder all of a sudden again. So, so who is going to take responsibility? I mean, if governments decide to overspend during election period, again, assuming without admitting that what you're saying is anything to go by,
right, yes.
Who takes responsibility?
Well, of course, they'll try to pin it on the previous government, as in the current government will try to pin it on the previous government. The previous government will find ways to defend it. But you see, the point is that sometimes, even if the fault is really with the previous government, when you're in power, you don't really have the luxury of
You've got to fix
people.
The problem.
Exactly. You can't really blame other people.
Sapere, let me take your thoughts on this.
Yeah, you look at economic indicators, and we assess the health of an economy with economic indicators, and you look at indicators, out of about 10 indicators that I sampled, only,
What's inflation saying? It's going down.
Inflation is going down, but inflation was 8.8 by the end of 2012. So inflation has really risen up to 15. So it's getting worse. Exchange rate was about 1.88 Ghana cedis to a dollar. Now it's about 4.2. So it's getting worse. By the end of the 2012 budget, public debt was around 35.7 billion Ghana cedis. Now it's about 112. So it's getting worse. How much was
employment percentage?
Yes, you take a look at the policy rate, take a look at the other, macroeconomic indicators. So these are the indicators that we use to assess the health of an economy. And everything is pointing out to the fact that things are a bit difficult than the year ended 2012. So 2012 figures were very good, were better. Out of the 10 indicators that are sampled, 2012 figures were about 7 of them were in good standing. The 2016 figures has only 3 better than the 2012 figures. So you compare 2012 and 2016, clearly you will say that things have been difficult, by the end of 2016.
Look,
and so
assuming without admitting that all we're saying is anything to go by, will this government be able to reduce taxes?
That would be a very serious issue. I sincerely doubt the ability to do that, at least in the upcoming budgets for 2017. If they are going to reduce taxes, they are going to find other ways of raising money.
I'm going to ask you to hold on to that because he's also been speaking on taxes. Let's get our sound bites and then we'll return in studio.
Expanding the tax net is always difficult. But what we have committed to do is that the national identification card will certainly be done this year, and that then with e-government begins to give us a lot more information as to who a citizen is and how we can get to people to participate in the civic responsibility of taxes. But also back to a philosophical belief that if taxes are not pernicious, more people will pay, and therefore you do not criminalize, sort of the average good citizen, and so we think that would increase the revenue base to be able to do our one factory, one district, $1 million per constituency, etc. But also within that policy understanding is also looking at our expenditures in our capital expenditures and seeing whether those can be also realigned to suit this program. So I think it's a lot more efficiency and targeting of the use of proceeds, because once you get systems decentralized, I think you want to create an environment of economic openness where therefore private sector is not only in the big cities but all around the country. There's a sense of freedom to engage and to facilitate environments that support private sector drive, because I think as Ghanaians there's a genius of entrepreneurship that we should support, and once you release people's capacities, it's amazing what the result can be. So that's where we are. Revenue leakages, have been a bane of the system. For us, the question really is whether there will be a lot more resoluteness and commitment to doing that. But when you hear about a BMW car being valued at $5,000 with its tax equivalent and the money we lose, I think you get deeply offended, and therefore you are even more committed to that. I think that the issue of protecting the public purse, as the President has said, is really a sacred duty, and we pray that the Lord will lead us to go out strongly to eliminate such leakages. It does not benefit anybody, and I don't think we should be shy about being very strong on how we tackle that.
Ben, are we in a crisis?
It's. I think they're trying to downplay the whole thing and make it look like, oh, the problem is bad, but you can solve it. It's worse than we thought, but we are good managers. We can deal with it. I think they're trying to manage Ghanaians' expectations now. I mean, I think they came to power with people have very strong expectations for the economy and for this government in particular. And if what they are saying is true about the fiscal deficit, then it puts them in a very tight position. It means they can't actually spend and do all the things that they said they were going to do, including the industrialization policy and several other things. I like the fact that he says they are going to think about broadening the tax net. And I think they are rather serious about that because the vice president is already leading the charge for the identification policy thing,
right,
which is good. I don't know how effective it will be though, because Ghanaians are very used to evading taxes.
At least we know who a Ghanaian citizen is.
Exactly.
That's the starting point.
It's a starting point. But then again, a very large proportion of the economy remains in the informal sector. And it's a little difficult to track businesses and the flow of money in that side of the economy. So maybe they should be looking at ways of doing that as well. But then again, if that is the way they want to go in order to raise taxes, or in order to raise revenue, then I am assuming they'll be serious about it and find ways to do it. They are trying to manage expectations now. I think that's what
you think they're trying to manage expectations as well?
Well, you have to manage expectations because the international community is always watching us. They are listening to us. Whatever you throw out there, it will feed into whatever the perception they have about your economy. So, for instance, if you go to a Eurobond market to raise funds, you have already told them that you are in difficulties, you are in crisis. So, if you go there, you're going to face a higher exchange rate, interest rate. So, you have to, devise a strategy how you put out the information to the public consumer, both local and then international. Having said that, I think that let me touch on the taxes. It looks like only few Ghanaians are overtaxed. If you take the 2013 Ghana Living Standard Survey, about the 11.9 million people, Ghanaians who are employed, just about 11% are in the formal sector, over 80% are in the informal sector. And therefore, you realize that those in the formal sector, their incomes are taxed. So you take a typical example. Somebody has a shop at this popular place, what do you call it, Makola.
You often go there?
No, but somebody may have a shop there, earns huge profits, builds a very nice mansion, but his income is not taxed. Another person works in the Ministry of Finance, earns about 500 Ghana cedis, his income is taxed. And that is unfair treatment. So we are saying that any strategy to rope in the informal sector will create more fiscal space. Right now, my brother was talking about, you asked whether you are in challenges or you are in crisis. Right now, all we need is money. Whichever way that we are going to go to raise more money, I think it should be well appreciated. And remember that we are a middle income economy, and therefore these grants and donations from the international community will not be forthcoming as they used to be when we were a lower income economy. So we have to feed ourselves. We're saying that we are grown up. We are a middle income economy, we are grown up. So we have to feed ourselves. We have to find a way of raising those taxes to increase their fiscal space so that they can embark on a number of policies that they promise. Right.
So you're still watching Business Focus, your weekly business and economic analysis program. My guest in the studio are Idris Kodia, is an economist with the University of Ghana Economics Department, also works with the Institute for Fiscal Studies. I've got Ben Amwa, who's also an economist with First Bank Financial Services. The discussion has just gotten a lot more exciting.
I mean, inflation is really pernicious to us, but that's really sort of the area of the central bank. But then I can cause that imbalance to the degree to which I go to the market to borrow. And so once I'm disciplined about it, the central bank's inflation target or direction in which they want to go will happen. If I faithfully execute my one district, one factory policy, and also inject money into the constituencies, I will create employment, and I'm confident about that.
All right, so Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta talking about inflation. He says inflation is a pernicious. What does he mean by that?
It's something that lasts, and it seems like it comes and it goes and it comes and it goes and it never really goes away. It's something that stays with us over and over and over again.
Okay.
But I think the issue is the fact that inflation causes so much havoc in our economy. We are the kind of system where when inflation rises, I mean,
Inflation is what? A lot of money chasing fewer goods?
that's the economic definition.
Okay.
There are so many other ways of looking at it.
The rise in the general price level.
Yes.
Okay.
Persistent rise.
Persistent rise.
Okay.
And it could be because too much money is chasing too much goods, but sometimes that is not really what is causing it. I think that has been the argument among
for some
economists.
time now, that
for
has
some
not
now.
been, it has not been the demand side.
It hasn't been the demand. It's more of a
Okay.
supply
What you
side
said is
issue.
the demand side.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
So-
been from power crisis, fuel prices,
Exchange rate depreciation,
exchange rate
Okay.
depreciation.
high
That-
interest
these are the
rates, you know.
supply side.
Okay.
But more money chasing.
Yeah, I was just going back
It's
to
a demand
secondary
side.
school.
It's a-
That's why
no,
inflation is when there's more money
Yeah, it is
chasing
the demand
fewer.
side.
Yeah,
It is
Okay,
true.
so over the years,
Yeah.
there's been an evolution. So
Yeah.
now we have crude oil prices. We have food prices also
Yes.
all determined. So that's the demand side of it, or the supply side of it.
That's
It's supply.
That's
All
supply.
the
That's
others,
what supply.
Okay.
that's
All right, just go
supply.
ahead. Yeah.
So the problem with is and I think he's right to have said that the inflation falls really within the ambit of the central bank rather than the Ministry of Finance. What we also know is that if the Ministry of Finance is disciplined about its borrowing and about its spending, it can help, the inflation trend downwards. Government is like the biggest buyer of goods and services in an economy like ours, which means that it always influences the prices. And if government borrows so much so that interest rates rise, then we see that supply side inflation that Mr. Sarkodie was talking about, because it becomes very difficult for businesses to conduct whatever they are doing, and they would have to pass on those higher interest rates to consumers by way of higher prices. And that is the problem that we have to deal with. Again, like he said, it's not really within their ambit, but the finance ministry has a role to play there in ensuring that inflation trends downwards.
But 2011, 2012, for 32 consecutive months, we experienced single-digit inflation. So what did we do right then, and what are we doing wrong now? I think it's all about management. If you fight inflation from the demand side, and the supply side has been the major contributor to inflation, then you're losing the fight. You understand? So why are we continuing to fight inflation? We've been raising the policy rate. The policy rate was risen from 15% to now 25.5%. And ever since, inflation has been increasing. So you are fighting something, the thing is not fought, it's still increasing. Why don't you revise your notes? So because it is not caused by the demand factors, in other words, not caused by more money in the system, you can't fight inflation with policy rate. The policy rate can be effective when, like you said, when it's more money chasing fewer goods. Then
We've moved away from that.
Not that we've moved
didn't
away.
move
I'm
away
saying
from
that
that.
the
The phenomenon is
greater
different.
part of the cause of inflation is not more money chasing fewer goods. So if you are fighting inflation with the policy rate, you are going to fail, because that is not the cause of it.
So there are more external factors.
Yes, there are more supply factors, and the supply factors, I've mentioned them to you: the exchange rate, the power crisis. The last when we experienced the dumso, it all had effect on inflation, because the producer would then have to go and buy generator, buy fuel, and he is a profit-making entity, so he will add to the price of
Crude
the item.
oil prices.
Of course, crude oil prices, and then you have and then also food prices. I'm very surprised about the way at the bumper harvest we have tomatoes, cassava, plantain, on the floor getting rotten.
I'm sorry to interject you, but we're hard pressed for time. Let's take his views on the exchange rate as well as the IMF program, and then we can wrap up with that.
Okay.
The city's instability. There are a number of things that we have to do for that, and that's where where the translation of the one factory, one district comes into the fore, because you are now looking to see whether you can generate exports and therefore diversify the economy. I think our interest in the agri sector also looks to address that. This monocrop of cocoa, is that all we should be doing? Are there more things we can do? And that is why we are doing that. Even the issue of remittances, and how in some instances the dollars actually do not get here, but we get CDs instant, are going to be looked at. Our current engagement with precious minerals I think some of the things have to be streamlined to do that. And unfortunately, we suspect that we are confident that oil receipts would also increase. So those will be helpful. In the medium term, of course, is the balance between gas and crude, where gas will increase considerably, and that will reduce the need for those inputs. But we are also going to really take a view, in going through the items that we import, and see how we can. If we currently import maybe 1.6 billion worth of food in one way or the other, what do you do in the various categories of food that we import to encourage that? And therefore, school feeding program, do we now grow a lot more rice so that we don't need that? Or do we also begin to encourage plantain and cocoyam so that we get back to our natural staple instead of getting bogged down with rice? So those are things. In terms of auctioning of dollars, as per central bank, depending on how much they have, they'll use their interventions as they feel it's an instrument that's appropriate.
The exchange rate is one of the key determinants of inflation in Ghana, unfortunately, because we're an import-dependent economy.
Right.
And so it's key for them to be able to manage, the depreciation of the cedi. Over the long term, we have seen that the cedi has performed poorly against the dollar, especially and against all the other major trading currencies, because we are always in a balance of trade deficit. We are always importing, and not exporting. And so it's a good idea if the MPP's industrializing policy, the one district, one factory thing, can produce some of the things that we import, so that we can cut our import bill a little and save some of the dollars for ourselves, so that the central bank can use it to, steady the boat whenever the cedi is coming under pressure. So it's a good idea if they can, for instance, impose a policy that ensures that whenever there are remittances or whenever these export companies are bringing in money, the dollars actually reach Ghana and don't get diverted somewhere along the way. As long as there's ample supply of dollars, we can be confident that the cedi will remain fairly stable.
You think so too?
Yeah, I think it's a demand and supply thing. The more you demand dollars, the more your cedi will depreciate. So we must do away with the importation of certain.
But how do you do away with that when you don't have?
How can Ghana be importing tomatoes and onions and pepper?
But when you don't have comparative advantage, what do you do?
Comparative advantage over onions and pepper? PK, we are talking about machines. We are talking about cars and tractors, and that is where we don't have comparative advantage.
We import chicken.
We have
we import,
exactly.
We import rice. We import sugar,
which we shouldn't be doing.
But these are long-term. These are long-term solutions.
We have the Commander Sugar Factory. If you can get about 5 of such factories, it will be able to feed Ghana, and then even get extra to export.
So in the meantime, what do we do? Cut down on imports?
In the meantime, let's identify.
You can't cut down on imports.
We can identify the tomatoes, the pepper, the onions, the rice, the sugar.
Or you slap high taxes on...
exactly. And
on imports?
No. The duties, you can check it out. You can check it out. Because if whatever is imported becomes more expensive than the locally produced one, you go. Another area is to help develop taste. Look, the school feeding program was made in such a way that they will use locally produced rice, tomatoes, and other items to feed the pupils in the public school so that they could develop taste for Ghanaian products. What do we see? The rice cooked for them were imported. So if you have a policy, a well-designed policy on paper, that the rice to be cooked for the school feeding program should be locally produced, to even encourage local farmers to get more income, and it's done the other way around. It is your responsibility as the person in government, the one we are giving power to enforce it. So you see, the problems with the economy
are interconnected.
Of course.
Exactly. It doesn't lie in the bosom of the finance minister, correct? But the agric minister has got a role to play.
Yes.
The trade minister has got a role to play.
That is why Honorable Asafo Mafu's role is to coordinate all what he calls the economic ministries. And I think it's a good idea because, like you said, no ministry stands alone. Because you take the school feeding program, the finance minister has a part to play to provide funds to the cooks.
And I think, if you ask me, that agriculture has a major part to play.
Exactly.
That's the mainstay of the economy.
Is the base of the economy. So that is why I get so much frustrated when we are importing tomatoes, when we are importing rice, we are importing onions. Certain things that we can easily produce them in our country. When we think that we have produced enough at the bumper harvest, we can have a storage facility, store them, so that in the lean season.
How do you experience glut in this economy?
Yes,
it is not possible.
Amazing.
Storage facilities for yam,
let's
rice,
listen to the finance minister on the International Monetary Fund program. We'll come back and wrap up the conversation.
Private sector surely is an area that we are excited about, and using the capital markets, whatever knowledge I have, we are going to encourage that to be, at least by the end of the period in which we are in government, be a key component of revenue raising and listings, etc. So we'll be there for that, and we've already met with them and gotten some ideas as to what to do. CDB facility, fortunately, we are meeting for a second time actually with the Chinese embassy, and those are all some of the things that we are trying to nail down and look at an enhanced relationship with China.
All right, so we're expecting to hear the finance minister talk on the IMF program. Unfortunately, we mixed up that soundbite, but I can take a broad views on that.
I think
possibility of reviewing the current arrangement.
Yeah, they should review it, because they have a manifesto, because the program was undertaken by a party that had different manifesto. Now MPP has their own manifesto, and
but of course there are basic things like deregulation, for instance. I don't think there's any way they're going to alter those.
But if you have campaign on reducing taxes, the program does not have
subsidy,
any tax reduction anticipation. So when you bring in tax reduction anticipation, you must go back to the negotiation table and renegotiate. If you are at the time that we're entering into the program, our arrears was about 6.5 billion Ghana cedis. Now we are talking about over 7 billion. If it is true that the arrears is over 7 billion, it's a total violation of the whole thing, and you have to go back and renegotiate. Your budget deficit is now into single digits. You promised the program that it will be 5%, 5.3%.
Again, if what you're hearing is anything to go by.
So the fiscal consolidation path is now being missed. And we must go back and renegotiate
Ben,
for better terms.
Fiscal consolidation will be the problem. If they are going to stay in the IMF program, they have to make sure that they cut spending further. And I don't know how that fits into their campaign policy, which makes sense that yes, it means they will have to sit down with the IMF and discuss a review. How successful that will be is the issue. The IMF is known for its extremely stubborn stand on issues, especially when it comes to economics. So we are yet to see what will happen with that. But we are all hoping that maybe they can be given a little freedom to pursue some of the policies they campaigned on.
Gentlemen, I'm going to say a big thank you to you for joining me on the program. My name is Parkus. Yes, we had press for time. Thank you, Edu Owusu-Sarkodie. He's an economist with the University of Ghana Economics Department and also with the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Ben Amwa is an economist with First Bank Financial Services. Thank you very much for watching. Stand by for News 360. We'll see you same time next week.